Welcome to the Lifeline, a production of Simply BJE. The goal of this podcast is to build, inspire, and to empower our listeners through conversations on business, leadership, and mental health. We invite you to follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and at www.simplybje.com/The Lifeline. Now, let's tune in for today's episode. Welcome back to another episode of the Lifeline Podcast. We are real brothers having real conversations about real life. We're your hosts, Bo Powell, Lindsberg Petway, and yours truly, Barry J. Elliott, also known as BJE. Today, we are excited to announce one of our co-hosts is stepping out into a new assignment and starting a podcast called Conversations from the Cave. The premise is that most men have been handed two frameworks for manhood, one from the institutionalized church and one from the culture. Both of them built a man's identity on what he produces, but neither of them is actually what God said. So we're going to dive into that conversation today. Good morning, brothers. How are you this morning?
What up?
Good morning. Great to see you guys again.
Absolutely.
And
Good
congratulations, Bo, on your new endeavor. We're excited to hear
Absolutely.
what the Lord has put in your spirit.
Yeah, I'm excited to share.
Yes,
excited
sir.
to share, man.
Yes, sir.
One thing I can always say about Bo, he is he knows the word, he speaks the word, but he gonna tell you what's for real. He's gonna tell you with no apology. I don't know about that. And I think that's what brothers really need to hear because we grew up in church, so that's all we knew. But there's some brothers that I know who kind of stay away from the church.
Yeah.
So when you say men have been given two frameworks, church and culture, what does that really mean?
Well, first, let me just say, man, I'm just honored that you would even give me the space to introduce the podcast, man. And I appreciate those kind words too, Lindsberg. But when it comes to the two frameworks, what I've learned is that most men have been living inside of one or two frameworks their entire lives, and never even realized it. And the crazy thing is, both frameworks are saying the same thing, but they're just coming from opposite directions. Now, when we think about the institutionalized church, and I want to be clear, I'm talking about institutional religion, not the body of Christ. So don't come for me. All right. I ain't coming for you right now. All right? But, the church told men that their value was in their spiritual function. Lead your household, be the spiritual head, provide for your family, protect your wife and children, cover the people God placed in your care. And none of those things are wrong when you look at them in isolation. But here's where they got it profoundly wrong. It handed men a function and called it an identity. It said, this is what you do, and implied that the doing was the same thing as the being, and it never really separated the two. And so generation after generation of men have built their entire sense of self on their ability to perform on a spiritual role. Now, when you look at the culture took a different road to the same destination, in my opinion. The culture said your value as a man is in your output, in what you earn, and what you build, and what you own, what you can control. So you think about how many men respect you, how physically or imposing you are, how dominant you are in your field. So the culture created a metric system for masculinity, and it changes every decade. So you actually never really arrive. And I know most brothers can feel that. It's like you're always chasing a standard that was designed to keep you producing. So it's two different voices, but the same distortion. And so both of them took the fruit of a man's life, the production, the performance, the provision, and then they made that the root of his identity. And when you build a man's identity on fruit, you've created a man that is only as valuable as his last harvest.
Wow.
And the moment that harvest fails, when the job ends, the marriage fractures, maybe his health goes awry, now that man has nothing left to stand on because nobody built anything underneath the conditions. So there was no foundation beneath the function. And that's really the root of most of the dysfunction we see in men today.
A metric system for masculinity. You hear that, Petway?
Yeah, that's kind of what I was thinking when you made that statement, that sometimes directly or indirectly we get our value from those things. And it kind of identifies itself in the church. If you got a large church, if you have so many churches up under you, if you're a bishop, you're an apostle, you got 10,000 members, you got 3 services, you got Bentleys and all of, all of the things that come with it, then that gives you your value. So what's the difference between a man who's productive and a man that's truly formed, Bear?
I mean, you hit it right on the nose. I mean, we start to value ourselves by what we produce. But when it comes to the difference between productive and form, this is really one of the most important distinctions in the entire show. Because when you think about it, most men have been told their entire lives that productivity is the goal. You work hard, you produce, you provide. And so what happens is the implicit message underneath all of that is that your production is what makes you a man,
Yeah.
and your output is your identity. And so men spend their entire lives chasing a feeling of enoughness through their production. But here's the thing, they never find it because production was never designed to answer the identity question.
Right.
So a productive man is doing, but a formed man is being, and the being governs the doing. So when you think about the scriptures, the men that shall know their God and be strong and then do great
Yes, sir.
exploits.
Yes,
So let me
sir.
say that again, because it's the whole foundation of the show. The being governs the doing. And so, and here's what I want to take you to, because in the Hebrew text, and this is kind of the crux of what led me to this particular thought process. In the Hebrew text, the original language of the Old Testament, the word for male is zakar. And zakar doesn't just mean a male in the biological sense. Zakar means to remember with an intent to execute immediately. And that's the design. And that's what God built into the man at the moment of creation before the fall, before religion got to it, before the culture replaced it. God designed man to remember what he said about who they are, about their covenant, and about their assignment, and then to execute from that place. Not produce to prove their worth, not perform to earn their place, but to remember who God said you are and then move from there.
Yeah, that's good.
That's good. So
So,
that means we're walking in our destiny. We're walking in purpose.
Yeah.
you're walking you're walking in covenant.
Yeah.
So productivity in the Zakar framework is not the foundation, it's the fruit. It's really the natural overflow of a man who knows who he is and he's operating from that knowledge. So the difference between a productive man and a formed man is this. The productive man is always trying to earn something. I mean, you think about the conversations we have as brothers. It's always, I got to get this. I got to get it done. We're always trying to earn something. But a formed man already knows what he's been given. And so one of these men is going to collapse when the production fails, but the other one stands regardless of what the conditions are doing, because his identity is sitting on top of his output, isn't sitting on top of his output, but it's rooted in something that doesn't change when the circumstances change.
I love it. I love it. As you were talking, it made me think about the pandemic. And though one of the gifts to me of the pandemic, I know it was a challenging time, but to me, one of the gifts of the pandemic was that it slowed me down.
Yeah.
And it taught me the value of being and not just doing. I relearned the value of being. And so for me, it was a challenging time, but it was a gift in the sense that I relearned how to be still and how to re-love or relearn to love myself and just appreciate life and again just being. So that's a powerful framework that you have there. So talk to us a little bit about where Conversations of the Cave came from.
Yeah, it's a really good question. And it was just an inspired thought more than anything, but it's really because I believe the cave is not where your story ends. I believe the cave is where formation actually happens. And most men have been told their entire lives that the cave is something to escape or something to survive, something to get out of as fast as possible. And so when you think about what's out there, every show, every book, pretty much every coaching program that's being built in this space is kind of built around the same premise. Here's how you get out the cave, or here's how to recover, or here's how you survive it. So the goal of the show is I'm saying something different. I'm saying don't just try to get out. Let the cave do what the cave was designed to do. Because there's a passage in 1 Samuel 22 that really stopped me cold when I really started to research this. And it was when David had just escaped from Saul. So he's running from his life and he ends up in this cave. The cave is called Adullam. And so men start finding him in the cave. And the text describes these men in three ways. They were in distress, they were in debt, they were discontented. And so it's 400 of them. Not David's elite guard, not seminary graduates or anything like this, but these were broken men. They were buried men, and they were carrying things that they couldn't put down, and they had nowhere else to go. And so when they went to the cave, David became their captain. He didn't turn them away. He didn't manage them. He didn't do anything like that. Didn't give them some type of recovery program. He became their captain, and then he gave them covenant. And those 400 distressed, indebted, discontented men actually became the mighty men of David, the most formidable warriors in all of Israel. And so the text actually goes on to name some of them individually later in scripture because of the extraordinary things that they did. So these were not the same men who walked into the cave. So the cave of Adullam was not where their story ended. It's actually where their story was built. So when I say conversations from the cave, I'm saying this from a place where men come to on purpose, not because they have to, but because they know that formation is going to happen there in the cave, because they know that's what gets built in the dark. Especially when we start to get honest and start to have real conversations with ourselves, it's really going to be unlike anything the comfortable seasons could have produced. So, you think about it when you're going through something tough, that's really where you learn your most lessons. When we like to see the wins and stuff like that, but you think about it, whenever you have gone through a tough season, for me, it's always produced something more in me. It's formed something more in me. So my premise is the cave is not punishment. The cave is the point.
Yeah.
Part of the process.
You made me think about how the term man cave, every man's dream is to have a man cave. And a lot of times we think of the man cave, we think of a place to kind of get away, to escape, to, regroup, all those kinds of things. But in your context, you're talking about the cave being formational. And I think that's powerful. Talk to us a little bit about why it's important, why the cave, the process, in the sense of why that's important, because I think that is missing not only from the formation of man, but it's missing from the formation of Christendom at large. Why is that type of formation necessary for the development of a whole person?
Well, ultimately, it goes back into identity. And so what the cave was really about, when you think about those men who went into the cave, man, something happened in the cave, when they were talking with David. It had to be the greatest halftime locker room talk ever because those men came out with a new identity. And that's really what the cave is really about, because what we've been given is strategies and things of that nature, but we haven't been really given a design. And so what the cave is all about is the design to work from, right? Because once your identity changes, once your sense of who you are begins to change, then everything around you begins to change. Your perspective changes, your relationships changes, how you approach life ultimately changes because your identity is new. And so when you think about most of the things that are out there, they really deal with behavior modification and things of that nature. But when you start thinking about the cave and really get into a process to really reconnect with who you are, then and everything starts to flow from that. Then what happens is we have a new integrated man that begins to approach life in a different way, right? And so he's not isolated and segregated how we've been taught to live or how we've been kind of raised and conditioned to operate in life.
Yeah. So I'm asking both of you this question. I'm gonna start with you, Bo, and then Lindsberg. Give me one experience that was a cave for you that became formational.
I got 10.
Yeah, I said I was about to start talking, but Lindsberg, he kind of went there. So I was
Well, you said I just thought about when I lost my job, and when I lost my career, and when I lost trust in the man of God that I believed in.
Wow.
You know what I'm saying? And at the same time, the ability to walk, to move, and as to flow. And I think about those nights in which my family was asleep and I got up and went downstairs to pray and end up crying and end up going through that period of uncertainty, not knowing. But when going through that particular cave, it kind of just taught me how to trust in God.
Yeah.
That's why I chuckled, because that's why I'm sitting in front of you guys today. That was one of the ones that kind of changed my life and where I was going. So, but I have matured enough to say I thank God for that, You know what I
Yeah.
mean? And that sounds crazy, but I thank God that I went through that. As Bo said, it made me stronger. It made me better. It made me be able to face the challenges that I face now without cowering, without thinking, just knowing, okay, God, I'm gonna get through it. It might be a week, it might be 2 weeks, a year, whatever. But that cave was very pivotal in my maturation as a saint and as a man. Yeah.
No doubt.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely, man. That's a lot to carry.
That's why I
You
chuckle,
know?
because it was like boom.
Yeah, I mean, I've been through many caves as well, and I'll just say I'm even in the cave now, in so
Mhm.
many words, right?
Yeah.
Not many people know. I had to take on a caregiving role for a mom who became non-ambulatory. And it was probably one of the most pivotal, I would just say not pivotal, but probably one of the toughest seasons of my entire life. I just came off a relationship that I thought was going to be, the one. And at the ending of that, and all of a sudden just coming here to look after my mom, to find out what was going on with her, because she kept falling and stuff. Found out she had some issues that needed to be dealt with. Eventually she became non-ambulatory. And so just having to kind of shut things down when you have all these aspirations and ambitions that you're trying to do. I've got a business, I got a life. And, when something's up with mom, you got to take care of mom.
Yeah.
And I was the only one who really had the freedom. I didn't have it, but I did, to really kind of address that. And so what made it even more exasperating was we got her to a place to where she's ambulatory again, but then she fell and broke her hip. And so just when you think you're coming out, you get sucked right back into it.
Yeah.
And anybody who's been a caregiver, a primary caregiver, you understand the emotional, physical, and mental toll that it takes on you, especially as a man.
Yeah.
So that has been a very rough season. But one of the things, as I was sharing with you this morning, is when you can't change the situation, you really have to change your perspective. And so, really, this podcast, this conversation with Kay was really birthed from that, because I found out some things about myself that I needed to address, and I had to reconnect to a version of myself that I had forgotten about. Um, and so when we talk about Sakar, remembering who you are, remembering who God said you are,
Yes.
that doesn't change because the circumstances change.
Mhm.
And somebody who is a Sakar man, even though his circumstances have changed, his identity stays intact. And so he can operate in that space from a place of dignity and still from a place of abundance and overflow, and more than anything, a sense of honor, because he understands my assignment is really under the auspices of God's sovereignty. And so when you operate from that place, it has definitely made a great opportunity for me to birth this show. And I just feel like maybe even God allowed me to get into this space so I could move into this direction.
Yeah, you said it right there. I always believe that you have to be qualified to do something.
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
You have to understand and have some sense of empathy and experience to really lead someone.
Yeah.
And it's a funny story. When I was in middle school, my PE teacher was 300 pounds. He was
Yeah.
out of shape. And I'm said, how can you teach me PE when you're not in shape? And I don't know if that motivated me. I became a PE teacher and I always had them cut offs and I was in shape. But I think that God kind of takes us through certain things so when we speak, people listen. And I
Absolutely.
know you're qualified, Bo, for this
Yeah.
particular season and for the cave.
Yeah.
Just your knowledge in finances, your knowledge in life, and now with this particular perspective of being a caregiver, that I have physically and mentally and financially and experiencing now, it
Yeah.
takes another um, toll on your life, as a man.
Yeah.
I
And,
can say that.
and it requires a specific bandwidth and capacity.
Yes.
And everybody
yes.
doesn't have. That's a different kind
Yeah.
of grace.
Yeah.
I've been stretched in ways
Yeah.
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
I would have never thought I would be stretched in. So
Yeah.
it's definitely been a learning season.
hmm And you said something very important. You said you have to take a different perspective on it.
Yeah.
And my wife's brother's wife, my sister-in-law, her mother just passed. She was 89. She was 89, and my mother's 90. So I had to just like, okay, this is the cost of her being here. I have to physically take care of her. I have to do these things because when she's gone, if she's gone, then I'm not doing these things. So I can't get to the point where I'm so tired of doing these things because when that happens, then she's gone. So I had to just change my perspective on it. And it's helping, but I'm still looking for someone.
Oh yeah.
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 You know, I mean, and that's just the thing. I mean, you still have to use wisdom, you
Yeah.
know, because, you know, you, like you said, you understand your bandwidth, your limits and things of that nature, you know, but it's like even what we talked about last week on a different topic about accountability, but we still talked about having systems for you to be able to live in and still do the things that need to be done. You know, as you know, because you've got other roles, you know,
Right.
husbands and stuff like that, as we all do. So,
Right. So as we step into the actual show and you kind of, share with us, but what can someone expect from season 1?
Well, you know, season 1 is called Before the Distortion, and that title is intentional. And so we're not actually going to be starting with the problem. We're starting before the problem. Before the institutionalized church handed men a reduced version of what God actually said, and before the culture replaced the design with the metric system. So we're starting before all this distortion actually accumulated. So we're going back to the original. So we're going back to what God actually said about men at the moment of creation, and in the Hebrew text, in the original language, in the original context. And I'm telling you, what you're going to find there is unlike anything that you've ever heard. So the season is going to be 9 episodes. Each one is going to be built around 3 different movements that I call revelation, recognition, and realignment. Revelation is where the man's going to encounter something true about what God said he was before the distortion. And I want to be clear, I'm not talking about information. I'm talking about the kind of encounter where it doesn't feel like you're learning something new, but just it really feels like you're remembering something that you always knew but never had the language for. You know, that's the revelatory piece. Recognition is where the man actually sees himself clearly, maybe even for the first time. You know, that's what happened for me. And it's going to be not with condemnation, but really with clarity. And so the goal is for him to be able to see the framework he's been operating from, and he sees the gap between who God said he was and the distortion and who the distortion has shaped him to be. And that gap is not about the shame, but the gap is an invitation. And so recognition is where the formation actually begins. And so realignment is where the man leaves with a new place to stand, not a to-do list, not a new performance standard, but a new posture. And so the goal is for him to have a truer picture of who he actually is. Really, that changes how he stands in his own life going forward. And so, and I'll say this about season 1, you know, there's one episode in particular, episode 5, that I built specifically for the women listening to the show. And it's going to go into what God actually designed the woman to be in relation to the man from the Hebrew text. And it's going to change how men see the woman in their lives and how women see themselves. And that episode alone is going to be worth the whole season.
Outstanding.
Wow. That's outstanding. So we know who's it for. We know what's going to be discussed. But on the other side of that, who might be challenged by it? Who might be convicted by it? Or who might be offended by it? Because I know both. Bo knows.
Bo knows, right?
Yeah, we're going to tap some of the chains off, right? Well, this show is really for the man who was never told what he was actually built for. Not what role to fill, not what standards to meet or anything like that. It's what God designed him to be at the level of covenant and identity. And that man exists in every demographic, every age group, every socioeconomic background. He might be sitting in church every Sunday, or just like you mentioned earlier, Lindsberg, he might have walked away from the church years ago and won't even go. So, you know, he might be grinding in the secular world and doing well by every external metric. But what he has in common with every other man this show is built for is this. He has been operating from a framework that wasn't designed to hold the weight of his life. And somewhere underneath the performance and the production, he knows it. I think we all do. And so more specifically, so this show is for the man who did everything the church told him to do, and he still lost his marriage and his sense of self. It's for that man who maybe found some version of the real red pill content, because it kind of accurately described what happened to him, but something in him knew that the solution wasn't deep enough, and he was right. And
Mm,
because, you know, mapping the sewer system is not the same as knowing what the city was designed for. And so the red pill accurately diagnoses the broken culture, but it doesn't give men a covenantal foundation to stand on. And this show does. So it's also for the man who's been consuming men's coaching content. And like I said earlier, he's been getting some tactical wins. He's building better habits. So he's self-improving, but he still feels like something foundational is missing, because it is. And this is where he's going to find it. Now, to your point, Lensberg, because I got to get to who is going to challenge. All right. So it's going to challenge any theology that elevates tradition above the actual text.
I like
And
it.
so they're going to feel friction in the show.
Can you repeat that? Can you repeat
I
that?
like
So
it.
it's going to challenge
let's
any
slow that down
theology,
here.
any theology that elevates tradition above the actual text. It's going to
Elevate
cause a lot of friction, right? So we're going to go back to
okay.
the source, not to what we've been taught about the source. And that's going to challenge some things that have been presented as settled.
Yes.
And so any man who is, now it's also going to challenge any man who's looking for permission to stay where he's going, where he is. He's going to be real uncomfortable there, because we're going to ask some very tough questions, right, that he's probably never been asked before. So it's not going to be a show that's going to allow a guy to come and be comfortable. And honestly, any show or framework that stops at mindset and behavior without really touching identity is going to look incomplete after a man spends time in this season in the cave with me. So that's actually what should happen.
That's powerful. That's
Powerful,
powerful.
yeah.
I know y'all think I'm ancient, but like I still like cartoons, and one of my favorite Disney cartoons is The Lion King. And there's a scene in that movie at the time in my life when I was backslidden that God used that scene to bring me back to myself. And it's the scene where Simba had started living with a pig. And I don't even know what the other animal was, but he started to live with them. And he walked away to himself and he had a vision of Mufasa. And Mufasa simply said to him, "Remember who you are." And for me, the conversations from a cave seem like a call to action for men to remember who they are, not just remember what they can do, but to remember who they are. So for me, from what I'm hearing, this is not just a podcast, it's a movement. So I'm excited about what it's going to birth, because I don't think that the end game is the podcast. It's a launching pad for what's next for you.
I believe that.
I want to, I believe that. And I'm excited. I, as I told you before in conversation, like I was like, oh my gosh, what is this going to mean for the Lifeline? But
we still here. We good, man.
No, we're good, right? But the reality of it is there's so much work to do that there is enough to go around, and we don't know how what you're going to do is going to open the door for somebody else. And so one of the things, and it goes back to one of our previous conversations about how men, whether overtly or covertly, can start thinking competitively. So I'm already, I was already thinking like, how are we going to continue to do the podcast, the Lifeline, and conversation from the cave? But the reality of it is, because we're part of the same kingdom, whatever we do is going to complement one another. So I congratulate you for this work, not just the podcast, but for the work. Because it's going to be groundbreaking.
Yeah, I appreciate that, and in actuality, I believe it's gonna drive both. Because what we're looking to do is to get to something specific with conversations from the cave. So that first season is really dealing with just the underlying framework, and so the whole season is really built on helping a man to reconnect with his identity. So it's very niche in certain aspects, because we're just driving straight to a certain point to get to the foundation. So it's a collaborative effort, in my opinion. And so, that show may draw people that will eventually even bring people to the Lifeline, and vice versa. Because from that, from the show, there are men who actually are going to need some more individualized attention, and I'll be there for that.
Yeah.
with
Yeah.
that.
Yeah,
Mhm.
I think it's ministry. It
Yes.
sounds like
Yeah.
ministry.
Yeah.
And ministry means people.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And if we look at our society and how, not just society, how God set it up, before there's people, there's the man. So Adam was the
Mhm.
first that he created. So the man needs to be in a line and needs to be operating in purpose so that everything else can follow suit.
Indeed.
Yeah.
Yeah. And,
Indeed.
going back to the start when you were talking about value and identity, I just thought about how sometimes
Mhm.
men can be so successful in their job
Mhm.
or doing something and don't even like it. Don't even want to
Yeah.
be there, but you're so good
Yeah.
at it. And then you kind of envious of a person over here who's just, no disrespect, to school teacher or just a
Right.
coach. And he just seems so
Mhm.
happy, but he's operating in his purpose
Yeah.
and his covenant, and he's making a difference with young people's lives. So, yeah, that's why I think this is going to be important,
Sure.
for people to see, men to see that you have to operate in your purpose and what God has called you to do. It was funny because I was driving back from dropping my son off, and that kind of hit me. You could be
Mm.
successful, making
Yeah.
millions of dollars,
Mm.
and not be fulfilled,
Yes,
and
sir.
always thinking like,
Yes,
man,
sir.
this ain't it, you
Yes,
know?
sir.
Yeah.
And then people always, and I'm just looking in the mirror
Yeah.
because a couple people asked me like, man, you don't miss coaching? I was like, yeah, I kind of miss it. I really could see you doing that, man. And I'm like, yeah, I kind of miss it. Um, and I do miss it. And I wish I
Yeah.
could just be a coach and just pour into young people. But, finances and different things have other responsibilities. But yeah, I'm gonna
Yeah.
tune in to the cave.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because what you're mentioning is part of what the men that came to the cave. What you just described was discontentment.
Mm-hmm.
Mhm.
And so that was one of the three men who were in the cave. They were distressed, in debt, and discontented. And so absolutely, you see that all the time,
Yeah.
because what we've been taught to do as men is we're externally motivated many things instead of being eternally driven.
Mm-hmm.
Eternally driven. I love
Yeah,
that,
that's
brother.
good.
You see what
Yes,
I'm saying?
sir.
And
Yes,
so
sir.
so
Oh,
so what
yeah, that's
happens?
a good one. That'll
Yes,
preach,
yes, sir.
Go ahead,
Yes,
you
sir.
got it, man.
Yes, sir.
And but because so when you start thinking about Zakar, it's when we start thinking about that covenant man,
Mhm.
he's connected to the assignment that God gave him. And from that place, when he starts to operate, then it produces the necessary fruit.
Yeah.
The Bible says, seek ye first the kingdom of God and all his righteousness, right? And all these other things just going to be added to you.
Yeah.
Now, and we know God just don't stop with addition. He's a multiplier as well.
Yes, sir.
And so that's the thing. When you really connect with that assignment and you start operating in that, there's a sense of fulfillment that you don't get, from the outward, accoutrements of success, and that's really what it's about. Jesus talked about, there's a meat that that not of. I'm getting satisfaction from a place you don't even understand at this point because I'm
Mhm.
operating and walking in my purpose.
Mhm.
I'm fulfilling my assignment in the earth, and that's a payment that no check can be written for. When you know that you're walking in alignment with the man who God said you are, there's nothing, there's no price that you can put. It's priceless. And so when you see someone who's in a what may consider be a lesser occupation, but man, you look at them, they're operating with so much grace and fluidity,
Mhm.
and they have so much fulfillment. You may have more money, but you're looking at them as like, man, I want that.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. Yeah.
Because this man seems so at peace and content with himself. And so
Right.
that's what this show is really looking to reconnect men with. Because once you connect with that and you get back to the source of all things, he'll make sure you get what you need to handle whatever things that need to be taken care of.
When you talked about being
Mhm.
eternally driven, I thought about Ecclesiastes chapter 3, verse 12, I believe it's 12 or 11,
Yeah.
but it talks about
Yeah.
he planted eternity in their heart.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
one of my favorite passages of scripture. And as I thought about that, I thought about something I posted on social media a couple,
Mm.
maybe last week or the week before. And I was saying how when I was 20, I wanted to know what my place was in the church. But as a
Yeah.
50-year-old, I want to know what my place is in the earth. What is it that I'm
Mhm.
meant to manifest in the world?
Mhm.
And not
Yeah.
just from a place of performance, but from a place of purpose and destiny. What am I meant
Mhm.
to manifest in the earth? What in me was meant to be manifested into the earth? So
Yeah.
I'm excited about what you're going to do and what God is going to do, more importantly, with
Yeah.
Conversations from the Cave. So before we
Excellent.
close, I want to say congratulations to you again, at the risk of being redundant. I'm
Appreciate that.
super proud of you. I
Yeah.
believe God is going to do some incredible things with and through you. I believe men's lives will be transformed, not just touched, but transformed. But before we go, give us the launch date and where it can be available for viewers and listeners.
Yeah, man. Again, I just appreciate the opportunity to share. I believe it is going to be a blessing to a lot of men and even women who listen in. And so, just to say, women, we're going to be speaking to women, in each show about that, because, we know, women tend to listen to things and they may have men in their lives. They need to share it with a husband, a nephew, or something like that. So it's built for men with women in mind. But the show is scheduled to launch April 7th. You can go to manifesttheman.com and get on the wait list to be reminded of the launch. You can also catch the Instagram Convo from the Cave as the handle. You can also go to Manifestations Coaching on IG, which is when you mentioned about manifesting the man on the earth. That's the name of my coaching
Wow.
business is Manifestations Coaching and Counseling. But the launch is April 7th. Get on the wait list. Go find me on IG at Convo from the Cave or Manifestations Coaching. And that's where you can find it.
Powerful, powerful. All right. Well,
Great,
April
great.
7th is the day. Conversations from the Cave. And are you going to be on YouTube as well, right?
So yeah, my bad. Yeah, it's going to be streaming on all platforms:
Okay.
Apple, Spotify, iHeartRadio, YouTube, Amazon. So you can find it streaming on all platforms. Definitely, if you go to manifesttheman.com, you'll be able to get the links and the launch date and how you can tune in. But we're going to be streaming on all platforms. We want all men to be able to have access to this.
Excellent. Well, to our listeners and our viewers, this concludes another episode of The Lifeline with your host, Barry J. Elliott, Lindsberg Petway, and Bo Powell. We're on a mission to bring light and life into the places where people don't really talk about, because we're real brothers having real conversations about real life here on The Lifeline. God bless you, everybody, and have a spectacular day.
Peace.
Thank you for listening to today's episode with host, business expert, and life coach Bo Powell, social media influencer and entrepreneur Lindsberg Petway, and leadership coach and mental health advocate Barry J. Elliott. Join us next week for another impactful conversation on The Lifeline. God bless.